Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Arthur Halston gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck as he approached the ornate gates of the Whitlow Vineyard estate. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched endlessly behind the property, their peaks soft in the afternoon haze. White tents dotted the manicured lawn like expensive mushrooms. Servers in black uniforms moved between clusters of guests dressed in clothes that cost more than most people earned in a month. His gray suit felt foreign after years of work shirts and steel-toed boots. The fabric pulled across his shoulders, reminding him that 12 years of welding and fabrication had changed his body just as much as the divorce had changed his life. Arthur stepped out of the truck and straightened his tie. The mountain air carried the scent of roses and champagne, the smell of money and celebration, his son's wedding. The boy he'd raised for 12 years before Jessica ripped him away with lies and court orders. Arthur walked toward the entrance, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. A security guard in a crisp uniform stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, sir. May I see your invitation?" Arthur reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers found the folded paper he'd been carrying for weeks. Not an invitation. Something else entirely. Something that would change everything in the next 20 minutes. "Arthur." The voice cut through the warm afternoon like a blade drawn across steel. Arthur turned to see Jessica Halston emerge from behind a white marble pillar, her emerald dress flowing around her ankles like expensive water. At 49, she still commanded attention. Her auburn hair was pulled back in an elaborate style that probably cost more than his monthly utilities. Diamond earrings caught the sunlight and threw it back in sharp flashes. She looked like money. She looked like success. She looked like everything Arthur had supposedly failed to become. "You weren't invited, Arthur." Her smile was perfect and cold. "Go crawl back to your workshop, loser." The security guard shifted closer, one hand moving toward the radio clipped to his belt. "Sir, you'll need to leave if you don't have proper documentation." Arthur studied his ex-wife's face. The same face that had lied to judges and social workers and their mutual friends 12 years ago. The same mouth that had convinced their son his father was a dangerous man who didn't deserve weekend visits or birthday phone calls. "Jessica." He nodded once, his voice carrying no emotion. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to that intimate tone she'd once used to tell him she loved him. "Kellen doesn't want you here. He told me himself." Arthur looked past her toward the reception area where white flowers bloomed in expensive arrangements. A string quartet played something classical and safe. Near the front, he could see Clay Whitlow checking his watch, probably wondering when the ceremony would begin. "Did he?" Arthur's voice remained flat. "Of course he did. You think after 12 years of silence, he's suddenly going to welcome back his deadbeat father?" Jessica gestured toward the vineyard with one manicured hand. "Look around, Arthur. This is what real success looks like. Not your little garage operation." Arthur folded the paper back into his pocket. Behind Jessica, guests were beginning to gather near the altar. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits. People who belonged in this world of careful appearances and calculated friendships. People who would never understand what it meant to build something with your hands. "You need to go." The security guard touched Arthur's elbow. "Now, sir." Arthur looked at Jessica one more time. She stood there like a queen surveying her kingdom, proud and untouchable and completely certain of her power. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that her careful world was about to collapse like a house built on rotten timber. "All right." Arthur turned back toward his truck. "That's right." Jessica's voice followed him across the gravel. "Run away. Like always." Arthur climbed into his truck and closed the door. He sat for a moment, watching Jessica smooth her dress and return to her guests like an actress taking her place on stage. She stopped to whisper something to Clay Whitlow, who glanced toward the parking area with a concerned frown. Arthur pulled out his phone and dialed the number he'd memorized weeks ago. "Yeah." Adley's voice was sharp and ready. "Pull the trigger." "About time." The sound of rapid typing came through the speaker. "How long do you want to watch the fireworks?" Arthur started his engine and put the truck in drive. "I'll be down the road." Arthur drove exactly 1 mile from the vineyard and pulled into the parking lot of a roadside gas station. From here, he could see the entrance gates, but nothing more. He bought a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since morning and leaned against his truck. The mountains surrounded him like sleeping giants. Patient, permanent, unmoved by human drama and the small wars people fought over money and pride and wounded hearts. Arthur checked his watch. 18 minutes since he'd called Adley. The wedding should have started by now. Kellen should be standing at the altar in his rented tuxedo, waiting for Laurel to walk down the aisle. Jessica should be sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes with an expensive handkerchief and basking in the attention that came with being mother of the groom. Instead, Arthur's phone was buzzing. "It's done," Adley said without preamble. Sent the files to Clay Whitlow's personal email and phone. Also forwarded copies to Laurel and 3 of Clay's business partners. The bank statements should be particularly interesting reading. "Good. You sure about this, Arthur? Once this gets out, there's no taking it back." Arthur watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the mountain thermals with lazy patience. The bird knew how to wait, how to watch, how to strike at exactly the right moment. She burned that bridge 12 years ago. Fair enough. Want me to monitor the situation? No need. Arthur ended the call and finished his coffee. The taste was bitter, but familiar, like most things in his life these days. He crushed the paper cup and tossed it in a trash barrel. 23 minutes after he'd left the vineyard, a black Mercedes roared past the gas station heading toward town. Clay Whitlow's car, moving fast enough to suggest panic. 5 minutes later, 2 more expensive vehicles followed, their drivers probably guests fleeing whatever chaos had erupted at what should have been a perfect wedding. Arthur climbed back into his truck and drove home. He had a ranch gate to finish welding, and the work wouldn't wait for other people's drama to resolve itself. The call came 3 hours later, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. "Dad," Whitney's voice was shaky and small. "What happened?" "The wedding's off. Everything's gone crazy. Mom's screaming at everyone, and Kellen looks like someone died." Whitney paused, and Arthur could hear voices arguing in the background. "Did you have something to do with this?" Arthur walked to the workshop behind his house and turned on the overhead lights. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls. His current project sat half-finished on the workbench, waiting for his attention. The work was honest and straightforward, unlike the life he'd shared with Jessica. "What makes you think that?" "Because you're the only person I know who could make Mom this scared." Through the phone, Arthur heard Jessica's voice rise above the others, shrill and desperate. The sound of a woman whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "Where are you now?" "Still at the vineyard. Kellen's trying to figure out what to do. Laurel locked herself in one of the upstairs rooms and won't come out. Her dad left without saying anything to anyone." Arthur picked up his welding helmet and checked the gas levels on his torch. Tomorrow he would finish the ranch gate. The metal would hold for generations if properly maintained, unlike promises made by people who confused appearance with substance. "Whitney, I need you to listen carefully. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Your mother has been lying for a long time. About a lot of things." "What kind of things?" "The kind that destroy families." Arthur set down the helmet. "Are you going to be okay tonight?" "I think so. Kellen asked me to stay with him. He's pretty messed up right now." "Good. Take care of your brother." "And Whitney?" "Yeah. Don't trust anything your mother tells you about what happened today. Or about me. Not anymore." After he hung up, Arthur sat on his back porch and opened a beer. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a star-filled sky. 12 years ago, he'd lost everything that mattered to him. His business, his home, his children, his reputation. Tonight, Jessica was learning what that felt like. 12 years earlier, Arthur stood in the hallway outside the family courtroom, his lawyer's words echoing in his head like hammer blows against steel. Emotional abuse, financial control, unstable behavior. The accusations Jessica's attorney had made painted him as a monster, a man who terrorized his wife and children behind closed doors. None of it was true. But truth, Arthur was learning, mattered less than perception in divorce court. Mr. Halston, his lawyer, a tired man named Peters who charged $200 an hour to deliver bad news, approached with a manila folder. The judge has made his decision. Arthur already knew what the folder contained. Supervised visitation only. Child support payments that would drain his business account. Jessica keeping the house, the cars, and primary custody of Kellen and Whitney. She's lying, Arthur said quietly. I know. Peters looked around the empty hallway. But she's lying very well. Her attorney specializes in these cases. They know how to make men look dangerous. Through the courtroom window, Arthur could see Jessica dabbing her eyes with a tissue while her lawyer whispered reassurances. She wore a simple blue dress that made her look vulnerable and sincere. The performance was flawless. What about the missing money? The transfers from our business account. Without more evidence, it looks like normal business expenses. Her attorney claims you're making false accusations to avoid paying fair support. Arthur thought about the Halston manufacturing account, the business he'd built from nothing over 8 years. The missing funds totaled nearly $200,000, siphoned away in small amounts that had seemed legitimate at the time. Office supplies, equipment maintenance, marketing expenses that Jessica had handled while he focused on operations. All lies. All theft. All perfectly documented in bank records that somehow made him look like the criminal. So, she gets away with it. She gets away with it. Peters closed the folder. Arthur, I've been doing this for 20 years. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and rebuild. Fight too hard, and you'll lose everything, including your relationship with your kids. Arthur looked through the window again. Kellen and Whitney sat in the back row with Jessica's mother, confusion written across their young faces. They didn't understand why their parents were fighting in court instead of working things out at home like normal families. They didn't understand that their mother had been planning this war for months, maybe years, building her case while Arthur worked 16-hour days trying to keep their business profitable. If I don't fight, she wins everything. If you do fight, she'll destroy whatever relationship you have left with Kellen and Whitney. Is that worth it? Arthur watched his children through the glass. Kellen was 12, old enough to remember the weekend camping trips and the times Arthur had taught him to use basic tools. Whitney was 9, still young enough to believe that her parents would always be there to protect her. Neither of them deserved to be weapons in a war they didn't understand. No, Arthur said finally. It's not worth it. 6 months later, Arthur sold Halston Manufacturing to pay Jessica's legal fees and the settlement demands. He kept enough money to open a smaller shop on the outskirts of town, far from the life he'd built and lost. The supervised visits lasted 3 months before Jessica found reasons to cancel them. Kellen was sick. Whitney had school events. There were scheduling conflicts that couldn't be resolved that Arthur's letters to his children were returned unopened. His birthday gifts were refused. Phone calls went unanswered by the end of the first year. Jessica had effectively erased him from their lives. And Arthur, believing that fighting would only hurt his children more, let her do it. For 12 years, he'd lived with that choice. For 12 years, he'd told himself that walking away had been the noble thing to do. Now, sitting on his porch in the present, Arthur understood that nobility and cowardice sometimes looked exactly the same, that Ruby's diner squatted beside Highway 40 like a metal box someone had forgotten to paint. The parking lot was gravel and potholes, filled with pickup trucks and 18-wheelers. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and bacon grease and honest work. Arthur had been eating here since he'd opened his smaller shop 8 years ago. Adley Voss slid into the booth across from him, carrying a leather messenger bag that looked expensive enough to feed a family for a week. At 31, she ran a cybersecurity consulting firm that served clients from Charlotte to Atlanta. She was also Arthur's goddaughter, the daughter of his best friend from his army days. More importantly, she was very good at finding things people thought they'd hidden. You look pleased with yourself, she said, signaling the waitress for coffee. Clay Whitlow pulled his funding for the wedding. Also ended things with Jessica. Fast work. The man has survival instincts. Adley opened her bag and pulled out a USB drive and a thick manila folder. But we're just getting started. Arthur accepted the folder and began flipping through the contents while Adley ordered eggs and toast. Bank statements going back 14 years. Email printouts with highlighted sections. Screenshots of text message conversations. Financial records that painted a picture of systematic theft and careful deception. How long did this take you? About 8 months of serious digging. Your ex-wife wasn't as careful as she thought. Adley sipped her coffee and grimaced. The bank statements are the smoking gun. She was siphoning money from your original business accounts for almost 3 years. Small amounts at first, then larger chunks toward the end. Arthur studied a statement from 13 years ago. A transfer of $2,300 to an account in Jessica's maiden name. Then another transfer 2 weeks later for $1,800. Then another for $4,000. She was planning the divorce long before she filed. Looks that way. She needed cash reserves to pay her lawyer and set up her new life. Your business was her personal piggy bank. Arthur closed the folder and reached for his coffee. Across the diner, a trucker was arguing with someone on his phone about delivery schedules and loading dock fees. Normal people solving normal problems. Arthur envied them. What about the Clay situation? That's where it gets really interesting. Adley pulled out her phone and scrolled through screenshots. I found their email correspondence going back 18 months. He was planning to invest in her catering business, but they were also planning to merge their families through Kellen and Laurel's marriage. Business and pleasure. Exactly. Clay gets a beautiful, charming partner who knows how to work a room and organize social events. Jessica gets access to serious money and the kind of social connections she's always craved. Your son's wedding was just the bonus that sealed the deal. Arthur thought about Kellen, probably still at the vineyard trying to understand why his perfect wedding had collapsed in 20 minutes. The boy had been a pawn in his mother's scheme, just like Arthur had been years earlier. There's more. Adley switched to a different screen on her phone. I tracked down some of Jessica's old friends from the country club. Women she used to have lunch with back when you were married. Turns out she's been spreading stories about you for years. What kind of stories? That you were emotionally abusive during the marriage. That you abandoned your children because you couldn't handle the responsibility. That you're mentally unstable and possibly dangerous. Adley's voice was flat and professional. She's been poisoning your reputation systematically. Arthur had suspected as much. The way former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The way contractors stopped returning his calls. The way his children looked at him during those brief, supervised visits 12 years ago. But here's the really interesting part, Adley continued. She's been using your name and social security number on credit applications. I found 3 credit cards and 2 personal loans that you never signed for. The debt's been building for years. Arthur felt something cold settle in his chest. How much? $47,000. And counting. The waitress brought their food, but Arthur had lost his appetite. Jessica had poisoned his reputation, stolen his money, and destroyed his relationship with his children. Now she was using his identity to fund her lifestyle. Can we prove it? Already did. Adley cut into her toast with mechanical precision. I've got the applications with her forged signature. Also tracked the IP addresses for the online applications back to her home computer. This goes way beyond divorce theft, Arthur. This is full-scale identity fraud. What do you recommend? Burn her down completely. File criminal charges for the identity theft. Expose everything to the IRS and the State Business Licensing Board. Make sure she never works in this region again. Arthur picked at his eggs, no longer hungry. Through the diner window, he could see his truck in the parking lot. Simple and reliable, it got him where he needed to go without drama or complications. Unlike his marriage. Unlike his relationship with his children. I want to think about it. Arthur. Adley leaned forward. She's been systematically destroying your life for over a decade. How much more damage are you going to let her do? It's not about me anymore. It's about Kellen and Whitney. Kellen needs to know who his mother really is. Whitney's already starting to figure it out. How long are you going to protect him from the truth? Arthur paid for breakfast and took the folder in USB drive. Outside, the morning air was crisp with the promise of fall. The mountains surrounding Asheville stretched toward a cloudless sky, permanent and unmoved by human drama. Give me a week. Fine. But Arthur. Adley unlocked her BMW. This woman has been playing a long game for 12 years. She's not going to go quietly when her world starts falling apart. Laurel Whitlow found her father in his study at 7 in the morning, staring at his computer screen with the intensity of a man watching his life collapse in real time. Clay Whitlow's restaurant empire had taken 20 years to build, and now it was all at risk because of emails and bank statements of photographs that painted him as a liar and a fool. "Dad!" Laurel knocked on the doorframe. "We need to talk." Clay looked up from the screen, his face gray with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Laurel, how much did you see?" "Enough." She entered the study and closed the door behind her. "How long have you been sleeping with Jessica Halston?" Clay's shoulders sagged. For the first time in Laurel's memory, her father looked old. 18 months. Maybe longer. "And you didn't think to mention this while you were paying for my wedding to her son?" It wasn't supposed to be serious. It started as business discussions about a catering partnership, and then Clay gestured helplessly at his computer. "She's very persuasive." Laurel sat in the chair across from her father's desk. The study was lined with awards and photographs from his restaurant groups, various openings, and expansions. 20 years of careful reputation building, all threatened by his inability to keep his personal life separate from his business interests. "Did you know about the money she stole from Arthur?" "Not the details. She told me there had been financial disputes during the divorce, but she made it sound like Arthur was being vindictive about support payments." "Dad, she embezzled over $200,000 from their business. She's been using his identity to open credit accounts. This isn't a vindictive ex-husband. This is a criminal." Clay turned back to his computer screen, where email after email detailed Jessica's plans to merge their families and their finances. The intimate tone of the messages made Laurel's stomach turn. "What are your business partners saying?" "Henderson wants an emergency board meeting. Morrison's already talking about pulling out of the Charlotte expansion." Clay rubbed his face with both hands. "If this gets out publicly, we're finished." "It's already out, Dad. Arthur Halston made sure of that." "Arthur Halston is a bitter man who can't accept that his ex-wife moved on with her life." Laurel pulled out her phone and showed her father one of the bank statements Adley had sent. "Look at this transfer. $28,000 moved from Halston Manufacturing to an account in Jessica's name. 3 days later, she used that money to pay her divorce lawyer." Clay studied the statement. That could be legitimate business expenses. It could be, but combined with 40 other transfers over 3 years, it's a pattern of systematic theft. Laurel put her phone away. "Dad, she's been lying to both of us. About her past, about her finances, about her relationship with her children. Her relationship with her children is none of our business. It became our business when you decided to help fund a wedding as cover for your affair." Clay flinched as if she'd slapped him. "That's not what happened, isn't it? You meet a charming woman at a business conference. She happens to mention that her son is engaged to a wonderful girl from a good family. You offer to help with wedding expenses out of generosity, never mentioning that you're sleeping with the mother of the groom. Laurel, how long were you planning to wait before telling me? Until after the wedding? Until after Kellen and I had children? Until it was too late for any of us to escape this mess cleanly." Clay stood and walked to the window that overlooked his carefully landscaped backyard. The roses were blooming despite the early fall weather, their colors bright against the morning sunlight. "I never meant for it to get this complicated, but it did get complicated. And now Kellen's heart is broken. His mother is facing criminal charges, and your business reputation is destroyed." Laurel joined her father at the window. "All because you couldn't resist a woman who saw you coming from a mile away. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to cut all ties with Jessica Halston immediately. I want you to pull your funding from anything connected to her or her family. And I want you to hope that Arthur Halston doesn't decide to pursue this further." "And what about you and Kellen?" Laurel was quiet for a long moment. She'd been engaged to Kellen for 8 months, planning a life with a man who seemed kind and honest and genuine. Now she wondered how much of what she'd loved about him was real and how much was just another layer of his mother's careful manipulation. "I don't know yet. But Dad, if you ever lie to me again about anything this important, you'll lose me completely." Clay nodded without turning from the window. "I understand. I hope you do, because this is the last conversation we're going to have about Jessica Halston. From now on, she's your problem to clean up." Scene 3. Whitney's secret. Whitney Halston knocked on her father's shop door at 8:30 in the morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the road. She'd been awake most of the night, replaying the chaos at the vineyard and trying to understand how her mother's perfect world had collapsed so quickly. Arthur unlocked the door and let her in. The shop smelled like metal and welding gas, and the kind of honest work that left your hands dirty at the end of the day. Rough night. The worst. Whitney handed him one of the coffees and sat on a stool near his workbench. Kellen's a mess. He spent hours on the phone trying to reach Laurel, but she won't answer. Arthur pulled on his work gloves and checked the gas levels on his welding torch. The ranch gate was nearly finished, its custom scrollwork elegant and strong. The family who'd commissioned it wanted something that would last for generations. How's your mother handling things? About like you'd expect. She's blaming everyone except herself. Says you've been planning this revenge for years out of jealousy and spite. Arthur fired up his torch and bent over the gate's final joint. What do you think? Whitney was quiet while her father worked. She'd spent most of her adult life trying to reconcile the man she'd come to know with the monster her mother had described. The father she remembered from childhood had been patient and kind, always willing to explain how things worked or help with school projects. The father her mother talked about was violent and unstable, a man who'd abandoned his children because he couldn't handle responsibility. Only one of those versions could be true. Dad, I need to tell you something about what Mom did after the divorce. Arthur finished his weld and lifted his helmet. Go ahead. She made us hate you, not just by telling us bad things, but by making sure we never heard from you. Whitney's voice was small and ashamed. Every time you sent letters or birthday cards, she'd intercept them. She told us you'd forgotten about us. Arthur set down his torch and pulled off his gloves. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the chest. How many letters? Dozens. Maybe more. She kept them in a shoebox in her closet. I found them when I was helping her move last year. Whitney started crying. Dad, there are Christmas presents and birthday cards and letters telling us about your new shop and how much you missed us. Arthur sat beside his daughter and put his arm around her shoulders. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was ashamed. Because I realized how much time we'd lost and how stupid I'd been to believe her lies. Whitney wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She made us think you didn't care about us, that you were too busy with your new life to bother with your old family. And Kellen doesn't know yet. I wanted to tell him so many times, but he was so angry at you for so long. I thought maybe it was better to let him figure it out on his own. Arthur thought about his son, trying to piece together the truth about his mother while his own engagement fell apart. Kellen was strong, but everyone had their breaking point. Whitney, I want you to show Kellen those letters. Soon. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm lying to protect you? Arthur stood and walked to his workbench, where tools hung in perfect order. Everything had its place and purpose. Everything except the 12 years he'd lost with his children. Then at least he'll have heard the truth. What he does with it is his choice. Whitney finished her coffee and prepared to leave. Dad, what happens now? To Mom, I mean. Arthur looked at his daughter, 21 years old, and just beginning to understand that the world was more complicated than she'd been taught. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Your mother made choices for 12 years. Now she gets to live with the consequences. But she's still our mother. Yes, she is. And you'll have to decide what kind of relationship you want with her going forward. But Whitney, you don't owe her loyalty just because she gave birth to you. Especially not if that loyalty means ignoring the truth. After Whitney left, Arthur returned to his welding. The ranch gate was nearly complete, its metalwork strong and true. It would hold for generations if properly maintained. Unlike some promises. Scene 4. The dinner trap. The invitation came on expensive stationery, delivered by hand to Arthur's shop 3 days after the wedding disaster. Jessica's handwriting flowed across the cream-colored paper in elegant script that probably impressed people who confused appearance with substance. Arthur, I'm hosting a family dinner tonight at 7. Clay, Laurel, and Kellen will be there. It's time we all sat down and cleared the air about recent misunderstandings. Please come. We need to work together for the children's sake. Jessica Arthur read the invitation twice, then called Adley. She's planning something, Adley said without preamble. This has all the hallmarks of a manipulation attempt. Probably, but I want to see what she's got planned. You're walking into a trap. Maybe, but I'm bringing ammunition. That evening, Arthur drove to Jessica's house carrying a sealed manila envelope in his jacket pocket. The envelope contained a signed affidavit from Rebecca Martinez, Jessica's former best friend and business partner from her catering days. Rebecca had finally agreed to go on record about Jessica's plans to marry into Clay's money through their children's engagement. The affidavit also included screenshots of text messages between Jessica and Rebecca, detailed conversations about securing access to Clay's restaurant empire and social connections. The messages painted a clear picture of calculated manipulation, with Kellen and Laurel as unwitting pawns in Jessica's scheme. Arthur parked behind Clay's Mercedes and Kellen's Honda. Through the dining room window, he could see the table set with Jessica's best china and silver. Candles flickered in expensive holders. The stage was set for another performance. Jessica answered the door wearing a simple black dress that made her look elegant and wounded. Her makeup was perfect, her smile warm and welcoming. "Arthur, I'm so glad you came." "Jessica, everyone's here. We're just waiting for you to start." Arthur followed her into the dining room, where Clay Whitlow sat stiffly at one end of the table. Laurel was beside him, her face carefully neutral. Kellen occupied the chair across from her, looking like a man who'd been through a war. "Please sit." Jessica gestured to the empty chair at the foot of the table. "I've made pot roast with those little potatoes you used to love." Arthur remained standing. "This is quite a production, Jessica. It's a family dinner, nothing more." She began serving food with elaborate care, narrating each dish like a cooking show host. "I thought it was important for all of us to sit down together and address the recent confusion." "Confusion?" Laurel's voice was sharp. "Is that what we're calling fraud now? There's been a terrible misunderstanding about certain financial matters." Jessica continued smoothly. "I wanted a chance to explain things properly, without all the emotion and drama." Arthur sat down, but didn't touch his plate. Around the table, the others picked at their food without enthusiasm. The pot roast was perfectly cooked, but nobody seemed to have an appetite. "What kind of explanation?" Clay asked. "The kind that puts recent events in their proper context." Jessica sat and folded her hands. "Arthur, I know you're angry about the divorce settlement. I understand that losing the business was difficult, but that doesn't justify creating fake documents to support false accusations." "Fake documents?" Kellen looked up from his plate. "The bank statements your father showed everyone. They've been doctored to make legitimate business expenses look like theft." Jessica's voice was steady and reasonable. "It's actually quite clever, if you understand accounting software." Arthur reached into his jacket and pulled out the sealed envelope. He placed it on the table in front of Clay. "What's this?" Clay asked. "Open it." Clay broke the seal and pulled out the affidavit. As he read, his face went from confusion to anger to something that might have been despair. "What is it, Dad?" Laurel tried to read over his shoulder. Clay handed her the document without speaking. Laurel's eyes widened as she read Rebecca Martinez's sworn statement about Jessica's plans to secure access to Clay's wealth through the marriage of their children. "She knew exactly what she was doing," Laurel said quietly. "The whole engagement was part of her business plan." Jessica's composure cracked slightly. "Rebecca Martinez is a bitter woman who's angry because our catering partnership didn't work out. She'll say anything to hurt me." Arthur pulled out his phone and played one of the recorded conversations Rebecca had provided. Jessica's voice came through the speaker clearly, discussing her strategy for securing Clay's investment in our future and making sure the kids tie our families together permanently. The room fell silent except for the sound of Jessica's own voice describing her plans in clinical detail. "That conversation was taken out of context," Jessica said, but her voice was shaking now. "What context would make this acceptable?" Kellen's voice was quiet and deadly. "The context of a mother trying to secure a good future for her children. Everything I did was for your benefit. You used us." Laurel stood up from the table. "You used Kellen and me as props in your scheme to marry my father for his money." "That's not." "Yes, it is." Arthur's voice cut through Jessica's protest. "Just like you used our children 12 years ago to cover your theft from our business." Just like you've been using my name and credit for years to fund your lifestyle. Clay folded the affidavit and put it back in the envelope. I can't be part of this anymore. Clay, please. No. Clay stood and headed for the door. This is over. All of it. Laurel followed her father without looking back. The front door closed behind them with finality. Kellen sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his untouched dinner. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but clear. How long have you been planning this, Mom? Planning what? This whole thing. The wedding, the relationship with Clay, using me and Laurel to get what you wanted. Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. I did what I had to do to survive. Do you think it was easy being abandoned with 2 children and no financial security? Do you think I enjoyed starting over at 40 with nothing? You weren't abandoned, Arthur said quietly. You were caught stealing and chose to run instead of facing the consequences. I was protecting myself and my children from a man who cared more about his business than his family. By destroying that business and stealing the money we needed to keep it running. Jessica stood and began clearing plates with shaking hands. You'll never understand what it's like to be powerless, to have your future depend entirely on someone else's decisions. You're right, Arthur said, standing to leave. I don't understand that, because I've never stolen from the people I claim to love. He walked to the door, leaving Jessica alone with the wreckage of her perfect dinner party. The next morning brought a cascade of consequences that Jessica couldn't spin or manipulate away. Clay Whitlow's restaurant group issued a statement distancing itself from recent allegations involving personal relationships and announcing Clay's immediate resignation from the board of directors, BY Noon. The local newspaper had picked up the story. Not the details of the financial fraud, but enough about the canceled wedding and the prominent businessman's sudden departure to set the gossip mill spinning. Arthur learned about the coverage from Whitney, who called him during her lunch break. It's all over social media. People are sharing screenshots of the newspaper article and speculating about what really happened. How's your brother? Better, I think. He finally read the letters Mom intercepted. He's pretty angry, but also relieved to understand why you disappeared from our lives. Arthur was welding when the next call came. This time it was Adley. The IRS got my anonymous tip about Jessica's unreported income. They're opening a formal investigation into her tax returns for the past 5 years. How long will that take? Could be months. But here's the interesting part. Her former business partners from the catering company have also come forward. Turns out Jessica's pattern of financial irregularities goes back further than we thought. Arthur set down his torch. How much further? At least 6 years. She's been skimming money from client deposits, using business accounts for personal expenses, and filing false tax returns. The IRS is very interested in talking to her. By late afternoon, Jessica had lost her position on the board of the local arts council. The charitable organization didn't want to be associated with someone under federal investigation, regardless of the eventual outcome. The next domino fell 2 days later, when Jessica's country club membership was quietly revoked. The club's board met in emergency session and decided that the negative publicity surrounding her situation was incompatible with their institution's reputation. Arthur learned about each development from Whitney or Kellen, who were watching their mother's social world collapse in real time. Jessica had spent 12 years building a new identity based on charm and careful networking. Now that network was abandoning her with the speed of people fleeing a sinking ship. She's been calling everyone, Kellen told Arthur over dinner at a small restaurant downtown. Old friends, business contacts, anyone who might help her. But nobody wants to get involved. What's she saying? That this is all a conspiracy. That you've been planning this revenge for years and somehow convinced multiple people to lie for you. Kellen pushed food around his plate. The scary thing is, I think she actually believes it. Arthur thought about Jessica's ability to rewrite history in her own mind. She'd convinced herself that stealing from their business was justified. That lying to judges was protecting her children. That manipulating Kellen and Laurel's engagement was securing their future. Your mother has spent so many years lying to other people that she's lost the ability to be honest with herself. Is she going to jail? I don't know. That depends on what the IRS finds and whether the prosecutors think they can make the charges stick. Kellen was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about all the times she told me you were the one who broke up our family. How she made you out to be this terrible person who abandoned us out of selfishness. She needed a villain for her story. I was convenient, but it wasn't true. No, but Kellen, the important thing isn't what happened 12 years ago. It's what happens going forward. What do you mean? Arthur looked at his son across the small table. 24 years old, and finally seeing his mother clearly for the first time. It was painful but necessary, like surgery to remove infected tissue. I mean, you get to decide what kind of relationship you want with her from now on. You don't owe her forgiveness just because she's your mother. But you also don't have to cut her out of your life completely if you don't want. What would you do? Arthur considered the question carefully. I'd be very careful about trusting her with anything important. And I'd never let her manipulate me into feeling guilty for her choices. 2 weeks later, Jessica's house went on the market. The asking price was significantly lower than comparable properties in the neighborhood, suggesting financial pressure rather than voluntary relocation. Whitney drove by the house and saw the moving trucks, then called Arthur from her car. She's really leaving. Where's she going? I don't know. She won't return my calls. Whitney's voice was sad, but not surprised. Kellen tried to talk to her yesterday, but she just screamed at him about being ungrateful and disloyal. Arthur wasn't surprised. Jessica had built her identity around being the wounded victim of Arthur's abandonment. Accepting responsibility for her actions would require rebuilding that identity from scratch. And Jessica had never shown much interest in that kind of difficult self-examination. Are you okay with this? I think so. It hurts, but I'm also tired of walking on eggshells around her. Tired of pretending her version of events made sense when I knew it didn't. Arthur understood. He'd spent 12 years trying to protect his children from the truth about their mother. Now they were strong enough to handle that truth and make their own decisions about what it meant. Whitney, you and Kellen are going to be fine. You're both strong enough to build good lives without her drama. I hope so, Dad. I really hope so. Arthur was welding when Jessica arrived at his shop 3 weeks after the dinner disaster. He heard her car door slam in the parking lot, but didn't look up from his work. The memorial piece he was creating required perfect joints, smooth lines that would honor the memory of someone's grandfather for decades to come. Arthur, Jessica's voice echoed through the metal building. Arthur continued welding, his torch focused on the delicate scrollwork that would form part of the memorial's design. The metal responded to heat and pressure, bending into shapes that were both beautiful and permanent. Arthur, we need to talk. Arthur finished his current weld and moved to the next joint. Through his helmet's dark visor, he could see Jessica standing in the doorway of his shop. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. Her expensive clothes looked slept in, and her makeup couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes. Don't ignore me. Jessica stepped into the shop, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. You destroyed everything. My reputation, my relationships, my future. You took it all away. Arthur lifted his welding helmet, but didn't turn off his torch. He examined the joint he'd just completed, checking for flaws or weak spots. The work was good. Clean. It would hold. Are you even listening to me? Jessica's voice was rising toward hysteria. Arthur set down his torch and turned to face his ex-wife. She looked older than her 49 years, worn down by weeks of watching her carefully constructed world collapse. I'm listening. Then explain to me how you could be so cruel, so vindictive. We were married for 15 years. We had children together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Arthur pulled off his welding gloves and set them on his workbench. Around him, the shop was organized and clean. Every tool had its place. Every project was planned and executed with precision. It was a simple life, but an honest one. It meant everything to me. That's why what you did hurts so much. What I did. Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. I protected myself and our children from a man who cared more about his business than his family. You stole from that business. You lied to lawyers and judges. You spent 12 years making sure our children believed their father was a monster. Because you were. You worked 16 hours a day and came home exhausted and angry. You never had time for family dinners or school events or anything that mattered to normal people. Arthur walked to the window that looked out over the mountains surrounding Asheville. The peaks were solid and permanent, unchanged by human drama and the small wars people fought over pride and wounded feelings. I worked 16 hours a day because you were stealing money from our accounts, because I was trying to keep the business profitable while you siphoned off funds to pay your divorce lawyer. That's not true. Arthur turned back to face Jessica. I have bank statements going back 14 years. I have records of every transfer you made. I have emails between you and Clay Whitlow discussing your plans to use our children's marriage as a business opportunity. Those records are fake. You paid someone to create them. Jessica. Arthur's voice was quiet but firm. Stop lying. To me, to yourself, to everyone. Just for once in your life, stop lying. Jessica's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like the young woman Arthur had married 27 years ago, before the theft and manipulation and systematic destruction of everything they'd built together. I had to survive, she whispered. You don't know what it's like to be powerless, to have your entire future depend on someone else's decisions. So you decided to take control by destroying me. I decided to protect myself and my children. Arthur picked up his welding helmet and examined its scratched surface. The tool was old but functional, worn by years of honest use. Unlike promises, unlike marriage vows made by people who confused love with possession, you protected yourself by stealing my money, ruining my reputation, and alienating my children. Then you spent 12 years telling them I was the one who broke up our family. You never fought for us, because every time I tried, you made it worse for Kellen and Whitney. Every court hearing, every mediation session, every attempt at reconciliation just gave you another chance to paint me as the villain. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. So you just gave up. You walked away and left us to figure it out alone. I walked away because I thought protecting my children from a war was more important than winning it. I was wrong. What? Arthur set down his helmet and looked directly at his ex-wife. I should have fought you in court every time you violated the custody agreement. I should have hired investigators to document your lies. I should have exposed your theft publicly instead of trying to shield the kids from the truth. Jessica stared at him. You would have destroyed our family. Our family was already destroyed. You made sure of that the day you decided to steal from our business and blame me for your choices. Arthur walked toward the door of his shop. Outside, the afternoon sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Where are you going? Arthur stopped, but didn't turn around. Back to work. I have a memorial to finish. That's it. You're just going to walk away again. I'm not walking away. Jessica, I'm choosing not to waste any more time on your drama. Arthur, please. I'm begging you. Call off the investigations. Drop the charges. I'll pay back every penny, but please don't let them send me to prison. Arthur turned to look at his ex-wife one final time. She stood in the middle of his shop like a lost child, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented his new life. The life he'd built after she destroyed the first one. Jessica, I didn't call the investigations. I didn't file the charges. I just told the truth about what you did. What happens next is up to the system you tried to manipulate 12 years ago. But you could testify on my behalf. Tell them I was a good mother, that I made mistakes but didn't mean to hurt anyone. Arthur pulled his truck keys from his pocket. You weren't a good mother. Good mothers don't use their children as weapons. They don't steal from their family's business to fund their escape plan. They don't spend 12 years poisoning their children against their father. Jessica's legs seemed to give out. She sat heavily on a metal stool near Arthur's workbench, her designer dress pooling around her like expensive water. I have nothing left. You have what you earned. Arthur walked out of his shop and locked the door behind him. He could hear Jessica crying inside, but he didn't look back. The memorial piece would have to wait until tomorrow. The work would still be there, patient and honest. Unlike some people 6 months later, Kellen and Laurel eloped at a small chapel in the mountains outside Asheville. The ceremony was simple and honest. 15 people who mattered to the couple, no elaborate reception, no expensive flowers, no drama. Whitney served as maid of honor, wearing a blue dress she'd bought at a department store instead of the expensive designer gown Jessica had originally insisted upon. She looked beautiful and genuine, free from the pressure to perform for people who confused appearance with substance. Arthur walked his son down the aisle not because tradition demanded it, but because Kellen had asked him to. The young man had spent months rebuilding his understanding of his family history, separating truth from the lies his mother had told for years. "You ready for this?" Arthur asked as they stood at the back of the chapel. "More ready than I was 6 months ago," Kellen replied. "At least this time, I know what I'm getting into." The chapel was small and rustic, built from local stone and timber. Sunlight streamed through simple stained glass windows, casting colored patterns on the wooden pews. It felt real in a way that the elaborate vineyard ceremony never had. Laurel waited at the altar wearing her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. Her father was not in attendance. Clay Whitlow had moved to Florida as planned, still dealing with the aftermath of his involvement with Jessica. He'd sent his blessing, but couldn't bring himself to participate in person. The minister was a local pastor who'd known Kellen since childhood. He spoke about love and commitment and the importance of building relationships on truth rather than convenience. The words felt meaningful instead of ceremonial. "Do you, Kellen, take Laurel to be your wife? To love and honor her, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "Do you, Laurel, take Kellen to be your husband? To love and honor him, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Arthur watched his son kiss his new wife and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but satisfaction. The knowledge that something good could grow from the ashes of something that had been poisoned by lies. Jessica was not invited to the ceremony. Nobody mentioned her absence. Her name didn't come up in the toasts or the informal reception that followed at a local restaurant. It was as if she'd never existed, which was probably the cruelest punishment of all for someone who'd spent her life demanding to be the center of attention. After the celebration, Arthur drove back to his shop and opened a beer. The memorial piece was finished and ready for delivery. The family who'd commissioned it would pick it up next week, carrying their grandfather's memory forward in metal that would last for generations. His phone rang as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. "Dad," Whitney's voice was warm and content. "Thank you for today, for walking Kellen down the aisle, for being there when it mattered. Thank you for asking me to be there. Are you okay? You seemed quiet during the reception." Arthur sipped his beer and looked around his shop. Simple tools, honest work, projects that would outlast the people who'd commissioned them. It wasn't the life he'd planned 20 years ago, but it was a good life. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Better than fine. Good, because Kellen and I were talking, and we want to start having regular family dinners. Just the three of us. Maybe once a week. Arthur smiled. "I'd like that. Sunday nights? You could come to their new house, or we could meet at a restaurant, or whatever works." Sunday nights sound perfect. After Whitney hung up, Arthur finished his beer and walked back to his house. The porch light was on, welcoming him home to a place he'd built with his own hands. No lies, no manipulation, no drama. Just peace. 2 years later, Arthur was in his shop when Adley stopped by with news about Jessica. He was working on a custom gate for a local ranch, bending metal into shapes that were both functional and beautiful. "She got out last month," Adley said without preamble. "Served 18 months of a 2-year sentence. Good behavior." Arthur continued welding, focused on creating perfect joints that would hold for decades. "Where is she now?" "Charlotte, working as a hostess at a chain restaurant, living in a studio apartment near the airport." Arthur finished his current weld and lifted his helmet. "How do you know all this?" "I keep track of people who might cause problems for my clients." "Professional habit." Arthur set down his torch and pulled off his gloves. Through the shop window, he could see the mountains surrounding Asheville, permanent and unmoved by human drama. "She's not my problem anymore." "No, but she might try to become one." Word is she's been writing letters to Kellen and Whitney, trying to reconcile. Arthur wasn't surprised. Jessica had always been persistent when she wanted something. Prison wouldn't have changed her fundamental belief that the world owed her forgiveness for her choices. "What do the kids say?" "Whitney won't even open the letters." Kellen read the first few, but stopped responding when he realized she was still blaming everyone except herself. Arthur walked to his workbench and picked up a piece of steel he'd been shaping into part of a memorial sculpture. The metal was clean and true, ready to be formed into something lasting and meaningful. She'll probably try to contact me eventually. What will you do if she does? Arthur considered the question while examining the steel. It was good material, without flaws or weak spots. The kind of metal that would hold its shape for generations if properly worked. Nothing. I'll do nothing. Nothing. She can't hurt me anymore, Adley. She can't take my children away or ruin my reputation or steal my money. The worst she can do is waste my time, and I'm not going to let her do that. Adley nodded approvingly. That's probably the smartest approach. It's the only approach. Fighting with Jessica is like wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. Arthur fired up his torch and returned to work. The memorial piece was taking shape slowly, each joint and curve designed to honor someone's memory in metal that would outlast the grief of those left behind. Arthur, Adley paused at the door. You know she'll never admit she was wrong, right? She'll go to her grave believing she was the victim in all this. Arthur didn't look up from his welding. I know. Does that bother you? Arthur considered the question while he worked. For years, he'd wanted Jessica to acknowledge what she'd done, to admit her lies and apologize for the damage she'd caused. He'd wanted her to understand how much pain she'd inflicted on everyone who'd trusted her. Now, none of that mattered. No, Arthur said finally. It doesn't bother me. Why not? Arthur finished his weld and set down his torch. Around him, the shop was organized and clean. Current projects were labeled and scheduled. Everything had its place and purpose. Because her opinion of events doesn't change what actually happened. She can rewrite history in her own mind all she wants, but the truth is still the truth. And what is the truth? Arthur looked around his shop one more time. Simple tools. Honest work. A life built on substance rather than appearance. The truth is that I have everything I need. After Adley left, Arthur locked up his shop and walked back to his house. On the kitchen table was a photo from Kellen and Laurel's second wedding anniversary party. Whitney was laughing at something her brother had said. Kellen had his arm around his wife, both of them looking genuinely happy. Arthur was in the background of the photo, not the center of attention, but clearly part of the family. Present. Included. Trusted. IT had taken 12 years, but his children had found their way back to him. Not because he'd fought for them or manipulated them or demanded their loyalty, but because he'd simply been there when they were ready to see the truth. Arthur opened a beer and sat on his back porch. The mountains surrounding Asheville stretched toward a star-filled sky, solid and permanent and unmoved by human drama. Somewhere in Charlotte, Jessica was probably writing another letter that wouldn't be answered or planning another scheme that wouldn't succeed. Arthur didn't care if he finished his beer and went inside to call his children. Sunday dinner was tomorrow, and he wanted to confirm a time. Simple plans with people who mattered. Honest relationships built on truth instead of convenience. The man who had lost everything had found exactly what he needed.